welcome everyone to a online symposium series hosted by the University of Louisville Pan-African Studies Department. And this series, which we call PAS and Friends, presents Conversations in Black. I think this is up to the fifth episode, if you will. So today, yesterday, some of you know, yesterday marked the 60 years since he was murdered in New York City. It was on February 21st, 1965. And some of you also know that he was actually born in the year 1925, May 19th, Omaha, Nebraska, believe it or not. And so this is the year that many people around the country and perhaps in other places in other parts of the world commemorate, as they say, the centennial of his birth. And so this is one little small effort on the part of the University of Louisville Pan-African Studies Department to contribute to that national and global commemoration and conversation. So my name is W.S. Dequeme. I'm on faculty here at the Pan-African Studies Department, the graduate DGS, Director of Graduate Studies as well. And I'll introduce our guests in just a moment. Let me see. Did I get it to everything? I might say, for those who are listening and who are interested also, then U of L Pan-African Studies Department offers a bachelor's degree and a PhD, actually. So folks interested in graduate studies should definitely get in touch with me. In graduate studies in Black studies. All right, let's see. Conversations in Black. All right, let me get over here. Give you all some sense of the flavor of what we've been doing, some of the prior series, some of the flyers for those. What is the Black Studies canon we did just before the election, which we will not speak of further, I hope. We did a piece on that. Just might generally say, the ways in which the discourse about that event was so distorted inevitably. All right, let's move on. We did, this was another sort of date-oriented commemoration. We did a Sana Shakur's book back in November, on on 45 years to the day that she escaped, that she was liberated. Interesting conversation as well. We did another Black Studies canon piece. We'll do more of those going forward. Just trying to present some conversations for people like what are, in fact, some of the essential texts that one wants to be knowledgeable in our field. And so back to what we're up to right here, right now. Malcolm X at 100. All right. Let me not jump ahead of myself. All right. So today our panel, we have three folks on the panel. Babazak Kondo, author of Conspiracies, he'll be joining us a little bit later. He said he could get here by 2, maybe if he was going to try, maybe get a little bit earlier. He'll be joining us soon. But we have my man, Dr. Sundiata Chajua, professor of Black Studies. Well, actually, the official name is African American Studies at U of I, and then also history, if I might. I didn't really memorize everybody's bio. And this guy has about a 5-page bio that he actually attaches to his email. I didn't memorize all of that. I know you as a down brother from Illinois and as the former president of the National Council for Black Studies. And I want to say welcome and thank you for joining us, my friend.
Thank you for the invitation, my brother. As always.
Okay, all right, good. And then my unofficial co-host for these events, Dr. Jakia Marie, up there at, I'm blanking out on the school, up there in Michigan, Grand Valley State. Did I get it right? She's up there.
Yep.
Speaking of NCBS, since they haven't had this conference this year. So you are the reigning NCBS Mary McLeod Bethune Carter G. Woodson Award winner. And so, and the main claim to fame beyond that is you were one of our first graduates of our graduate program, and that's how we really know you around here as one of our outstanding graduates of our PhD program. So you're one of us. Dr. Marie, thanks so much for joining us. Okay, well, I think have that sort of stuff out of the way. So let's get started. I had sent all of our panelists a list of some of the topics that we really want to go through. As much as time allows, we allotted ourselves 3 hours, and so we divide into three different sections. This first hour, the legacy of Malcolm X. Talk about some of the various ways in which, okay, what is actually the legacy of this man? The second hour, take a look at Malcolm X and the topic of religion, and particularly the organization that he was a part of for so many years, the Nation of Islam. And then the third, Malcolm X, the third hour, Malcolm X in the 21st century. You know, what does he mean today to people? I mean, I know what he means to people, in my generation. What does he mean today in the 21st century? So those are some of the general topics that we want to do. And so before we go any further, then in hour one in our discussion of legacies, let's let the man speak for himself.
You're welcome. Thank you for letting the people over in Europe know what the white man in this country is doing to black people and the hypocrisy he's practicing when he accuses them over there of not getting their house in order. 20 million black people in this country have been just as thoroughly colonized by the American white man in a more shrewd, modern way than all of the colonized people in Angola, South Africa, or any other part of this world. But the white man over here hides his own dirt by constantly pointing toward Britain and France and Portugal and these other countries and accusing them of being colonial powers when he mastered colonialism before those countries ever knew what it was. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Oh, let's get that off the screen right quick. Okay. Anyway, I mean, I would say, like I say, generally speaking, in terms of this topic of Malcolm X, I think it's usually always best to let the man speak for himself. And that's sort of vintage from 1963. That's sort of vintage Malcolm there as well. So, I mean, the question, I guess the general thing that I really wanted to start out with my panelists here is, so in terms of saying, okay, the legacy of Malcolm X, right? A really broad topic, but what would be your 60-second version of that to you? And either one of you could start. Okay, I'm gonna draft people. I'm not gonna put it. I'm gonna just point to people from here on out.
60 seconds. It might be 90 seconds, brother. Two things. We have to think about the substance of Malcolm and the symbol. And talking about the symbol and his symbolic value, I think it's as a warrior that Malcolm clearly was taking the most militant positions available at that time. His willingness to adjust ideology and strategy and tactics to the situation, I think, is extremely important. In terms of substance, I would point to what I call the Malcolm X doctrine. Now, my interpretation of this is different than Imari Obadali's, and I would identify several points that I think make up the Malcolm X doctrine. First is that he took a black nationalism that was apolitical and made it a political nationalism. He reintroduced internationalization. So being an internationalist, he reintroduced that to the movement. It had been lost since the 40s. and he brought back Pan-Africanism as part of the African-American struggle. And I would say that definitely Malcolm made self-defense, armed self-defense, reasonable, right? So that you could very quickly understand, yeah, you must defend yourself. And then if you look at the OAAU, Organization of Afro-American Unity, Malcolm adopted a non-sexist public policy well before folks in the civil rights movement. And then finally, Malcolm began a critique of capitalism. And I would say that that's what he bequeathed. That approach to policy is what Malcolm bequeathed to the Black Power movement.
Right. By the way, I mean, I knew you couldn't do it in 60 seconds, so it wasn't no thing. Right on now. Jakia, your turn.
60 seconds.
Yeah, I think.
She probably won't be able to do it either. It's cool. It's cool.
All right, challenge accepted.
At another level.
So I
And
think
they
for
were saying
Malcolm
that
X's,
just the discipline and the leadership, and I think all boys need to do
What's
it.
happening? I don't know what's happening.
somebody's was unmuted and I just muted them back.
Oh, okay. I don't even know how
Yeah.
you might unmute it. Strange. Okay.
They did it themselves. So I think that for Malcolm X, I think all of those points about his legacy, the legacies, the globalization aspect, I think his critique, I think his ability to critique capitalism and colonialism and neocolonialism simultaneously, which wasn't being done on such a large scale. So he didn't focus just on one thing or another thing. He really was able to package this conversation to empower people to see the realities of our lived conditions, which I think is a huge legacy. And also on, I think, a more on the ground level is that Malcolm X is somebody that in many ways can be looked up to in just his day-to-day life as somebody who overcame so much and still was able to bring people along. He didn't make it somewhere and then decide I'm going to look down on people. So he always had a heart of gold, and I think that makes him someone that we can take that and look up to as it relates to community organizing, as it relates to fighting against these systems, but also as it relates to intellect, as it relates to building community.
Okay. I like that. I think I agree with at least almost everything that you all said. That's right there. Let me see. I mean, yeah, y'all said a lot. Only thing I would say, I mean, from my perspective, an eternal symbol of Black resistance, right? Someone who certainly but certainly manifested, spiritual transformation. And then the last thing that I would say is, I mean, one of the fiercest advocates for Black self-determination, right? So I guess really also then a symbol of that as well. I mean, there's so much more, as you all added with some depth there as well. But this man's legacy definitely immense. I want to, like I say, I wasn't going to necessarily speak a whole lot on that, because some of the things I think that I probably believe in probably are reflected in the organization of this panel, really. I want to call your attention actually to really one line in what I guess we could call it a classic poem from the Black arts movement. Robert, if you're into Black literature, Black poetry, Robert Hayden is a name you're probably familiar with. An older generation really was not at all a part of that Black arts movement piece. But when we talk about like some of the classic books on Malcolm X later, I'm sure the book from 1970, the poetry collection for Malcolm on Broadside Press will come up, and Robert Hayden's poem El Hajj Malik El Shabazz is in that. And so I was always struck by, in terms of talking about legacy, really the very last line of the piece, which is kind of there when he says, when it's all about his different transformations. And so for the final phase, that last short section of his life, Robert Hayden writes, he rose renewed, renamed, became much more than there was time for him to be. I was always struck by that phrase because after his death, I mean, his stature as an icon grows so tremendously, and who can really claim, who can really claim it? That's the thing about it, with a person as complex as that. And as you all pointed out, when you all talking about his legacies, you all talk about a number of very specific things. And then there are others, who would emphasize some other things. That's even before we get into people who are like essentially critical of this very influential figure in American history. But I was always struck by that. I mean, the fact that, he dies really is killed, right really at the beginning of trying to do some stuff on his own. And so the Malcolm X story, the Malcolm X icon is so much of a what if, right? So much of what he would have gone on to, that is so much a part of his legacy that even almost in some ways maybe even transcends the historical figure. Certainly I was always struck by that. So I wanted to get that into the conversation. Become much more than there was time for him to be. This is what Robert Hayden is talking about at the end of the 60s, really, that so many people with so many different agendas became deeply invested in this symbol, So that's a question I'll be asking at more than one point in the conversation today, is what the meaning of that icon is. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, let's move on then. So like I say, I want to have this man speak for himself a little bit and have us chew on some of the things that he says. So, right. I mean, the road of Malcolm X, the real person, to becoming a maybe not quite universal, but maybe at least at a certain point in time, almost universal icon, a symbol, beloved symbol for Black people. Uh, and that's something that bothered a lot of people over the years in terms of saying, well, what did it actually mean? So let's take something. Well, I guess there's a couple of different ways to go when we listen to this clip. So this is one of a classic clip. This is from Malcolm in the spring of 1964. And he makes a statement about this very topic here, right? Black people, what is Black people's relationship to the state? And I really want to ask you all after we listen to this, how you assess that and whether or not, or to what extent that represents the thinking or feelings of Black people. So let's listen to Malcolm's take on the question of identity.
Not a politician. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I don't even consider myself an American. You and I were Americans, there'd be no problem. Those hunkies that just got off the boat, they're already Americans. You're already American. Everything that came out of Europe, everything, every blue-eyed thing is already in America. And as long as you've been over here, long as you and I have been over here, we aren't Americans yet. Well, I am one who doesn't believe in deluding myself. I'm not going to sit at your table and watch you eat with nothing on my plate and call myself a diner. Sitting at the table doesn't make you a diner. That's right. You must be eating some of what's on there. Being here in America doesn't make you an American. Being born here in America doesn't make you an American. When it first made you American, you wouldn't need any legislation. You wouldn't need any amendments to the Constitution. You wouldn't be faced with civil rights filibustering in Washington, D.C. right now. They don't have to pass civil rights legislation to make a Pollock an American. No, I'm not an American. I'm one of the 22 million black people who are the victims of Americanism. One of the 22 million black people who are the victims of democracy. Nothing but disguised hypocrisy. So I'm not standing here speaking to you as an American or a patriot or a flag saluter or a flag waver. No, not I. I'm speaking as a victim of this American system. I see America through the eyes of a victim. I don't see any American dream. I see an American nightmare.
So, I mean, this is from 1964. I don't have an exact month. I think this is before I think this is before the May trip. So this probably puts us in April or May of 1964. But I always thought that this was really one of Malcolm's definitive statements that are a central part of his legacy there as well. So, you know, when people ask me who Malcolm X is, this would be one of the, as far as clips, I would turn them to this one personally. So he says a lot there as well. You know, you all's take on on our man here.
You know, I thought the first clip that you played is one that doesn't have the same level of currency, so that fewer people are aware of that first clip. And I thought what was notable is that Malcolm's making an argument that we are a colonized people. And I took that clip to be from either late 63 or early 64.
The first one?
Yeah.
The first one, he's still in the nation. So that's 63.
Okay, so it's 63. But, you know, there's that transition, right?
Yeah.
So before, the message to the grassroots was delivered while he was still in the nation, but that is in no way a nation sermon.
No,
Right? He
yeah.
clearly broke with the nation intellectually at that point. He may waver, but the arguments that put forward. And so what struck me about that is, for example, Harold Cruz in 67, when he does the piece on Afro-American nationalism in Studies of the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? The early pieces that begins to make an argument for Black people being a colonized folk. Now, I'm aware that Du Bois reaches that conclusion in the late 40s. So does Mary McLeod Bethune. They point to that, but developing it as a thesis, right? Malcolm puts it out, and if you think about his interaction with Kenneth Clark, Clark's book in 1965, Dark Ghetto, makes, for the first time, a very clear and precise argument that Black folks are colonized. And obviously, that's coming out of his dialogues with Malcolm. So,
Yeah.
I saw that as very important in terms of just a theoretical proposition that we are a colonized African nationality. This clip simply, from my point of view, highlights that position, that we are the victims of Americanism, as opposed to ever truly being treated as citizens. And I think that when you harken back. If you're not citizens, what are you? Well, colonial subjects.
Okay. Okay. All right. Jaquia, your thoughts on this clip and, our conversation?
Yeah, so I think that the clip and the idea in general really forces us to consider what identity is and nuance it, because we're talking about, you can't even say a time, because it's still the same way now, where people don't really discuss identity as relates to Black folks in relation to cultural heritage or ethnicity, right? It's just Black. And we, again, with missing that nuance means also we are not having those conversations about what we bring, what we continue to create, how we continue to create, how we continue to, I would say, build our identities and build our communities and build our ethnicities in various ways. So Malcolm X is actually bringing this to the forefront. I think he's specifically saying national identity, but I also think that he's actually calling us to consider our ethnicity,
Yeah.
right? Because we usually talk only in relation to race and not in relation to ethnicity and cultural heritage. So, I mean, I think that, again, these were conversations that were not happening as much. I mean, personally, I mean, it's kind of difficult. Like, I have a blue passport. Does that mean that I have any allegiance to this country? Absolutely not. Does that mean that I feel a part of the country? No. And that's what he's saying, is you impose an identity on me. And that takes strength, that takes power. And I would also say I'm very interested to hear, I mean, if people want to post in the chat, kind of how they think about national identity, ethnicity, and race in relation to Malcolm X as well, or if these conversations are even happening today, the way that Malcolm X was having them right back in the 60s. I don't even know if those conversations were able to continue as much, because the more forward-thinking intellectuals were getting taken out left and right.
I heard that. Well, let me have y'all react to this. I'm gonna challenge y'all a bit. All right. So, like I said, I think that's kind of a definitive a representation of Malcolm X's thought. Is one that I overwhelmingly, I think, subscribe to, but I don't think that represents the viewpoint of more than like 10 or 15% of Black people today. I think overwhelmingly, like if you put this sort of issue to some sort of measurable thing, Black people would overwhelmingly say, oh no, we are Americans. And that's what I see out there. So I love that, but I don't think that represents the thinking of too many of our people, today. Well, I mean, do y'all think I'm wrong in having this sort of viewpoint?
I mean, to be fair, most of what Malcolm said didn't represent the majority of how Black folks was thinking. You know what I mean? So, but that's why we're talking about him. Right. Well, that's why we're talking about him, is because he was outside the box, but outside the box in the right way. And again, people fail to nuance these conversations. My personal opinion is you can say that you contributed greatly to the growth of a country, right, which is by force a settler colony, while still rejecting being a part of that. You can say this country owes me reparations, but as an individual, as a community, we don't want parts in this today. Both can be true. And I think that people think that, or I would say the conversations that I've seen is the legacies that African people have in the US, to accept that they think that to accept those legacies and to accept those realities and those histories also means by default they will accept us, and that's not how it goes. So Malcolm X is not denying anything that any of our histories, but is also saying, why would I want to be in allegiance with a settler colony? Why would I want to be in allegiance with this huge machine that even today continues to destroy the world literally at alarming rates? I don't want to be a part of that. That does not mean that that does not mean that we also need to erase the influence that we have had in this place, right? So both can be true, but it seems like people don't have those conversations to separate the two.
What do you think about this?
Yeah, well, one, I think that we need to turn more to the empirical evidence, right? So one of the things, three points, right? One, we know that in 1968, Newsweek magazine did a survey, and that survey revealed, I mean, they did it with Ropers or Gallup, one of those polling companies, and they discovered that 28% of African Americans would prefer to either have their own nation state or be repatriated to Africa. In 1971, they did a second survey, and they found that 33% of African Americans would prefer their own nation state or their own, or to be repatriated to Africa. Now, and I think that that's a very blunt and crude way of getting at the question of how African Americans think about themselves in terms of nationality. And I want to admit that there is a relationship between nationality and ethnicity, but I think it is absolutely wrong to think about the African American people as simply an ethnic group. We're a nationality. We are people without a state, right? So when a good friend of mine, Eduardo Bonilla Silva, discovered that when you interview white people for 30 minutes, they give you the cant of the American dream, right? Treat all people equally, da, 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 da. But in the 31st minute, they relax and it becomes the N-word, the N-word, the N-word, right? I would say that with Black folk, what you get is what they believe is acceptable. And that is to say, we're Americans because we built the country and we don't want to be put out, right? We want to make that decision. So they're going to sound like they're a civil rights person.
Okay.
But there's a deep, deep nationalist sensibility up under that. And so when you keep talking, right, what comes out is the ways in which we are dominated, discriminated, and degraded, and the ways in which we are separate from this place. And that becomes the majority of a conversation with any Black person if you keep pursuing it. And so what I would contend is this: the nationalist impulse at this moment doesn't express itself as a strictly territorial type of nationalism. It expresses itself as a proto-nationalism, meaning that people aren't pushing for an independent territory. They're pushing for control over Black institutions and the spaces where we currently live. And that still represents a differentiation between us and white Americans. And if we look at Charles Blow's latest book, The Devil You Know, from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where he proposes that we systematically organize the return to the South so that we gain control over 3, 4, 5 states, right? That is an expression of a form of nationalism.
Okay.
And so that's what I would argue.
Okay. No. Very intelligent points. For me, this is part of the great hoodoo, the great magic show that was achieved with the whole campaigning and subsequent twice election of Barack Obama. But that's a whole nother story. in terms of the Black American investment in this thing called America. But I like that. I like that. Let's move on, just because we want to have as much as possible. Like I said, we want to raise some issues, and we know we're not going to definitively answer a number of these topics. How could we in just one little conversation? But we want to try to get as much as possible. Listen to this man himself, and what's the word? Ponder like what this guy may have been up to. So let's stay here in the spring of '64. Yeah, I don't need any preamble. Let's just listen. We're in the spring of '64.
The next thing you'll see here in America, and please don't blame it on me when you see it, you will see the same things that have taken place among other people on this earth whose condition was parallel to that of the 22 million Afro-Americans in this country. The people of China grew tired of their oppressors, and the people rose up against their oppressors. They didn't rise up non-violently. It was easy to talk about the odds were against them, but 11 of them started out. And today those 11 control 800 million. They would have been told back then that the odds were against them. As the oppressor always points out to the oppressed, the odds are against you. When Castro was up in the mountains of Cuba, they told him the odds were against him. Today he's sitting in Havana, and all the power that this country has can't remove him. He told the Algerians the same thing. What do you have to fight with? Today they have to bow down to Ben Bella. Came out of the jail that they put him in. And today they have to negotiate with him. Because he knew that the one thing he had on his side was truth and time. The time is on the side of the oppressed today. It's against the oppressor. And truth is on the side of the oppressed today. It's against the oppressor. You don't need anything else.
So this is another one of those sort of definitive clips by of Malcolm X, that I've heard over the years. The image, before we turn to our panelist reaction, the image, there he is with someone who he looked up to a great deal, A.M. Babu of Zanzibar, Tanzania. Which book is it? And Malcolm X Speaks. One of those speeches is called At the Audubon. A.M. Babu is is the invited speaker, and it's really a very interesting sort of moment. You know what I mean? So Dick Gregory shows up and comes up and talks and that's interesting. Malcolm reads a telegram from Che Guevara. And like I said, he extols A.M. Babu, who he looked up to because there's an actual revolution in Zanzibar. The independence was granted to the Sultan, and this political party he was a part of, they rose up and made a revolution, and then subsequently,
Urged.
Yeah, merged. I was looking for the right word, with Tanganyika to form Tanzania. Point being that Malcolm is talking about pretty much all of that time period that he has after he leaves the organization. And he's pointing to people saying, listen, these people who actually are taking up arms and overthrowing the state, these are actually our models. And so, I don't know. I think that part of his discourse, I don't think has carried into the present day in terms of all the people who would wear Malcolm X shirts and all that other sort of stuff. I don't know. What do y'all think about that clip and just what has become of this part of his legacy? Jakia goes first.
All right. No, I agree with you that I don't think that conversation has has continued, but in my opinion, the stance makes sense. So maybe not necessarily armed struggle taking over, right, taking over the country, but the standing up for oneself, right? And in that way, demanding respect and accepting nothing less, which is, as you already said earlier, Malcolm X, obviously he was a champion of self-defense, obviously, but we saw that continue as we got into the Black Power movement, and we got away a bit from the respectability politics when we thought the respectability politics would save us, and yet here we are in 2025, not saved. So that conversation has not continued, but now I think people are trying to see. I think honestly, people want those results, but they don't want the work. And Malcolm X was saying you have to put in the work. And during this whole time, when we're looking at different African countries, we're seeing the work, we're seeing the struggle. And now we have folks who simply don't want to, and when I say folks, I mean like collectively, who struggle with being uncomfortable. They're used to convenience. They're used to everything coming very quickly. So when it comes to this idea of standing up, of fighting back, it sounds really nice because you want the end result, but the actual work that it takes to get there, people aren't necessarily willing to do it, which is the reason I think that the conversation hasn't continued.
Yeah, I really like the way this was framed in terms of the images of that Malcolm X OAAU meeting where Malcolm has Babu there.
Yeah.
And he holds up, he in the talk, he points out the Communist Party began with 11 people, and then they came to gain power. And he talks about Ben Bella, and he talks about, he's got a telegram that he reads from Che Guevara. And
Yeah.
so this is very, very important, because when we think about Malcolm's Pan-Africanism and his internationalism, it's very important that we root it firmly amongst the radical left. You see, because his Pan-Africanism isn't a Pan-Africanism, it's the Pan-Africanism of the Casablanca group. It's the Pan-Africanism of Nkrumah. It's the Pan-Africanism of Nasser. So it's the more radical wing that Malcolm has committed himself to, and all of the individuals that you pointed out, Brother Takimi, are socialists, are communists. And so Malcolm is clearly indicating the direction he wants to go. So it's not just about armed struggle fighting against colonialism. It's about what will we create when we overthrow these folk. So I found that to be very, very important, that we dive into Malcolm and see who he sought to make the alliances with and the direction he was headed before the assassination.
And can I just add to that?
Sure.
I think I think that the context is important, right? Everybody who's around, but also with that context, when you take a step back, you see that the enemy there's a common enemy, right? And that common enemy is the system.
Right.
So, and I think that when we talk about other people, that's where we see those strengths. Is they're like, we know the playbook. This is how we can aid you in this, and we can support you in this because we know the playbook, because we all have the same common enemy, even though they may be waving a different flag, right? So I just want to say I totally agree with that, putting that into context to see it more on a global level.
Okay.
You want to say one more kind of quick thing.
Okay.
I had in '92 of studying political economy with Babu. There was a Black Studies
Okay.
school that was organized by Abdul Kalimat.
Okay.
You know, when you get a chance to sit at the feet of someone like Babu, it's the stories and the experiences,
Oh,
you know, phenomenal impact.
no, that's great. That's great. I did not know that. No, that's great. That's great. I love to have met this fellow. Um, let's just move. Let's hear some more from Malcolm. Actually, we're going to hear from that exact same speech we just heard from, and really the next 2 or so minutes of it. I guess he's more or less amplifying the same theme a little bit. You know, everybody will recognize there's a picture of him with the Cuban leader. Anyway, everybody knows who that is. Let's listen to Malcolm.
You'll see it. You'll see terrorism that will terrify you. And if you don't think you'll see it, you are trying to blind yourself to the historic development of everything that's taking place on this earth today. You'll see other things. Why will you see them? Because as soon as people realize that it's impossible for a chicken to produce a duck egg, even though they both belong to the same family of fowl, so-called fowl, a chicken just doesn't have it within its system to produce a duck egg. It can't do it. It can only produce according to what that particular system was constructed to produce. The system of this country cannot produce freedom for an Afro-American. It's impossible for this system, this economic system, this political system, this social system, this system, period. It is impossible for it, as it stands, to produce freedom right now. For the black man in this country, it's impossible. And if ever a chicken did produce a duck egg, I'm quite sure you'd say that it was certainly a revolutionary.
Another one of, like I say, I mean, just like definitive clips from this man. And I see Baba Zach Kondo has joined us after all the confusion. Hey, unmute yourself, maybe. Let's see if you can do that, and let's join us in the conversation. Can you do that? Can you unmute yourself? Okay, are you trying? Or can we do it? Okay, I think was that you?
Okay, you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now. So
Okay.
thank you very much for joining us. Welcome. Like I say, man, well, you already know, and just in terms of the complete confusion in terms of the link, but you're with us now. We've been going for a minute, and welcome aboard. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I'm using my wife's computer, so if I'm a little bit of a, it might take a second here and there because I'm just getting used to it.
Hey, what's the word? So the only like the top of your head is kind of visible. Can you alter the angle to just get? Yeah. Well, okay. There you go. That right there is great. All right. Thank you so much. Well, you will listen. Well, let's let you get the first word in. That clip in terms of what Malcolm is saying, because once again, it kind of gets back to like that fundamental question that let me stop editorializing. I mean, he makes a very kind of definitive statement about Black people's relationship to the U.S. state there. Anyway, I'll stop there. What were your thoughts?
Oh, are you talking to me?
I'm talking to Baba Zach A. Kondo himself.
Okay. I mean, I only caught the tail end of it, but
oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
That was the point. That was the speech where Malcolm was talking about being a revolutionary chicken.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think for the record, Malcolm always was very sensitive as far as, identity and where we fit into the larger schemes of things in the United States. I'm reminded, he was talking about, sitting at the table, and, just because you sit at a table doesn't make you a diner. And so his point there was to say, just because we as Africans live in this country, it doesn't make us Americans. And his point was, until you're treated like an American, then don't call me an American. I can sit at the table, and if I don't have no food on my plate, don't call me a diner. And I think that here Malcolm is talking about the larger identity issue that we as Africans, have been, struggling with, similar to that, to what Du Bois said in 1903 in the Souls of Black Folk, when he talked about that double consciousness, that two-ness. It's like, what, who are you? Where are you? Are you African? Are you an American? And of course, Du Bois's point was that these two concepts fight each other, that these two concepts will basically tear one another apart, because this country had a history of proving that you couldn't basically be both. You could be treated like a human being as an African person, and at the same time be, be an American and stuff. So I think here too, when he was talking about the revolutionary chicken, I think Malcolm was kind of, struggling with that whole concept that Du Bois was talking about.
I heard that. What do our other panelists think about that? This system cannot produce freedom for an Afro-American. Let me stop. I'll start to recite it again.
Two things. One, Malcolm's ability to speak directly to our people, because he's drawing out of the culture, right? And so Malcolm uses animal metaphors throughout much of his speaking, because as he said once, I'm an old farm boy. Well, he's talking at a moment in which Black folks had moved. The majority are still in the South. We're no longer majority of rural people, but we're talking about folks who are the children of the rural South, who are now in the urban North. So those metaphors still ring. And in fact, in the urban North in the 60s, I know that my family had chickens and goats. In Illinois, okay? So Malcolm is speaking in a way that really does touch the masses of our people, because he's speaking to the modal experience of Black folk. That is to say, the experience that we've most frequently had as a working class. Now, I don't think he's so much talking about the state here. When he says the American system, I think he's talking about the political economy. He's talking about capitalism, because when you go deeper in the quote, he actually condemns capitalism, right? Okay. And says it used to be like a vulture, but now it's cowardly, right? And so I see Malcolm there breaking ground in that he's making it clear that there's the state, but there's also the political economy that we have to focus on, and its role in degradation, domination, and exploitation, right?
Okay. Jakia, you got thoughts about this one? Like I said, anyway, let me stop.
I would say it's actually funny, because my grandparents, when they were in Indiana, I know my great-grandfather also had his farm as well. It's like, it don't matter. Right. It don't matter where we live. But I think it's actually impossible to separate the political economy from the state, because that's what fuels the state. And for me, how I at least interpret this is, that's kind of even what Malcolm is getting at, is that as long as this is the foundation of the state, then it is impossible for us to ever be included into it, because the foundation is exploitation, the foundation is genocide, the foundation is racism, and that's actually the soul of the United States of America. And if this is what it is, there's no way we can ever find ourselves as being seen, one, first of all as human, and then second as respect, as worthy of respect. So I think that it just goes to, like who the United States actually is. And no matter what laws they try to put out, they haven't actually gone down to the foundation and try to rectify a lot of those wrongs. And some of these things are putting band-aids on wounds. Some of these things, I mean, obviously we know are just performative, just to try to make people for votes. But I think that, like, at the core, the United States as a settler colony is fundamentally evil, and therefore it's impossible for us to be included.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I agree with Malcolm. I agree with you all. I don't know if Black people in general in 2025 do, but that's an interesting conversation to put on the table. And like I say, to have Malcolm speak and have us react to it. So got several others in this supposedly hour one, which you need to be winding down. We started so late. So we're going to have to actually completely, I want to get into this conversation about the OAU and the OAAU, but we got to make some cuts because of, like I say, how late we got started. Let me say this by way of making cuts is it's not like the only session we do on PAS and Friends, Conversations in Black. It's not the only one, the only conversation we do here about Malcolm X. It's not like this has to be the only one. This is not going to be the only one. So there certainly will be some future conversations, at least on some aspects of Malcolm X. At some point in the future, we're just going to actually do a session on the autobiography itself. So anyway, we're making some cuts here. And so let me do this one. Because as educators, I think you all know about this, and just generally in the discourse, people like talk about the civil rights movement and include Malcolm X. And it's like, wait a minute, Malcolm X spent his whole career talking about, how completely wrong the civil rights movement was. Its tactics, its philosophy, its whole ethos. So let's hear just one. I mean, y'all know a million examples. Everybody who knows Message to the Grassroots knows that. The whole topic of the Message to the Grassroots is how silly and ineffectual the civil rights movement is. That's the entire context. The last half of it is this complete evisceration of the March on Washington. It's hilarious. We're not even going to do that. It's too long. Let's listen to them talk right here, though.
Are you playing something, Takwame?
Y'all can't hear?
I'm not hearing nothing.
You got to share your screen again. For us
Oh, I didn't know I had stopped. I'm sorry.
Oh, yep.
What happened? I don't know what happened.
It's been down for a minute. I thought you wanted us all to see each other.
No, I don't know what happened. I don't ever remember whatever I'm trying to say. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Y'all see it? Well, doggone it. I had
Yep,
no
there we
idea.
go.
So, y'all heard the other stuff when he's talking about the revolutionary chicken, right? Y'all heard that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I guess we're back on business. All right, let me start over. After everything I just said, here's Malcolm talking. Oh, what's going on?
Oh, this might be in the video itself.
Can y'all hear it?
No.
Nope.
What's going on? Oh. All right, we're gonna let that go then. I mean, y'all heard these. I don't know what's going on. We played some other videos that worked, right?
Yeah. Others
I don't
work.
know what's happening. All right, so let's just skip that.
Do you want to summarize it?
I'm sorry, what?
You want to summarize what he says? And we
Oh, I
can,
don't need to. It was just another clip where he's talking about, hey, as long as you're running around here talking about you, one of the Joneses, with the white man's name, bragging about your part in the white man's system, you never will be given recognition nor respect. Your problems will continue to go unsolved and will still be in this same predicament 1,000 years from now that we're in right now. That was kind of it. But anyway, the point really being, he's deaf on the civil rights movement his whole career. Yet today, almost everywhere in terms of casual conversations, they talk about him as being part of the civil rights movement. I'm like, that is so completely wrong.
Yeah. If I can chime in, I think
Yeah.
one of the things that we want to do in order to kind of put it in some type of context. Remember this though, during his last few weeks of life, remember he went to Selma, he talked to SNCC, he talked to a lot of the students, he talked to Ms. King and Andy Young. It seemed real clear that Malcolm was trying to figure out a way that he could become more active in the civil rights movement. And also we need to remember this
That's
as
true.
well. When Malcolm was still in the nation, particularly in 1963, he was constantly trying to pressure Elijah Muhammad to become more active in the civil rights movement. And that was one of the tension between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad, is that Malcolm tired of hearing people say the Muslims talk tough, but they don't do nothing. And so Malcolm's thing was, if we're more active and let people see that we're serious about our struggle, then that would prevent that from happening. And it would also increase the numbers, inside the Nation of Islam. So I guess the challenge for me is, yeah, Malcolm was a great critic of the civil rights movement. And yet I think the evidence suggests that he was trying, at least during his last few weeks, to find a way at the same time to become more active. Oh, one other point too. Remember this, in June of 1964, there was a meeting that was held between Malcolm, representatives of the various civil rights movements or organizations, most of them sent representatives, if not sending their leaders. And the primary topic of discussion was, how could Malcolm fit into the civil rights movement? But more significant, how could they, create more of a unity between Malcolm and the more Black nationalist oriented, communities and the civil rights movement?
if I could jump in there and kind of take some of the threads that Brother Zach used. And Baba, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well, Baba.
Flip it. I don't think Malcolm had any interest in the civil rights movement, joining the civil rights movement. He had an interest in transforming the civil rights movement into a movement for Black liberation. And that required engagement, that you enter into the struggle. But Malcolm's goals and objectives, his strategy and tactics, and his ideology is a precursor to Black power. So had Malcolm had his way, had he lived and been able to develop the forces, we would have had the Black Power movement, right, a few years earlier. But that's what Malcolm sought to do. He's not trying to, what he does is that he's infusing a Black nationalist with a critique of capitalism into as ideology, as philosophy, as strategy, into a civil rights movement whose tactics he admires, their ability to put mass people on the streets, right? Well, I think what's happened is that we don't define the civil rights movement or Black Power or any of our movements. And so it gets left out up to the journalists and other silly people. So what ends up happening is this. When we say civil rights movement, we don't know what we're talking about. We're talking about something that's very specific and has a period of history, right? Social movements last 47 years. Civil rights movement, 1955 to about 1968, the death of King. And that's a movement that's different from what came before. What came before was the NAACP's legalism. What Martin Luther King introduces in Montgomery, or I should say the Women's Political Council, Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Improvement Association, what they introduce is mass direct action and civil disobedience, right? And that is those things, getting the masses of our people involved, having nightly meetings where you got 5,000 people coming out, right? Where the people democratically set forth an agenda, where they engage in disruptive behaviors. Those tactics is what Malcolm wants to take from the civil rights movement, because from Marcus Garvey forward, right, Black nationalism had been depoliticized and had abandoned the actual struggle to improve the lives of Black folk with fantasies.
Okay.
Yeah,
Jackie,
so-
you want to in on this one? Malcolm and the civil rights movement. I mean, let me
Yeah.
just say, maybe my complaint is a general complaint about how American discourse is entirely debased about everything, and that there is no intelligent public or popular discourse about any topic whatsoever. So of course Malcolm X gets conflated with the civil rights movement, since, to piggyback on what Sundiata said, I mean, the most Americans, the most that they know about the civil rights movement is Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. I'm done.
yeah.
Zakia.
Yeah, I think that I mean I think that it really does boil down to racism, in that there's no way that you could that there's just like the assumption that all Black people fit into one category, into one box. So the civil rights movement being seen as a time period, and everything that took place in that time period related to Black people is the civil rights movement. Which isn't the case, but that's because when it comes to journalists, and when it comes to a lot of academics as well, Black people really don't have agency. So if it's not Martin Luther King, if it's not Rosa Parks, then it's not worth discussing. It's not worth dissecting. It's not worth seeing the agency of different groups of people, different camps of thought. So I think that the fundamental thing is truly racism in the academy, and also, of course, in Western media, which we know.
I want to one other thing here, and that is that we have to be very, very clear that there are differences in terms, particularly class, in the Black community, and there are corresponding ideological differences. So while it is racial oppression, right, but it's also that Black liberals share much of American ideology and believe in the American dream, and and they wish they could be treated as Americans. And that sector of the community has helped shape the notion that there's only the civil rights movement. They erased Marcus Garvey from the history. They erased Black socialists and communists and Black nationalists from the history. So it's not just the Europeans. They have a sector of our community that shares their interpretation of the world, with the exception that they demand inclusion into that burning house.
So I just want to retract and then restate that maybe instead of saying racism, it's not only racism, but it's also white supremacy, and individuals and groups attempt to have some type of close proximity to white supremacy. So that requires diluting the histories and agencies of Black people around the world.
Nah, that's all real, man. So like I said, we've already had about 5 conversations that we could really have expanded seriously, but we've gone past, I mean, even with the half hour starting late, we've still gone past our hour allotment for this first section. So here's another topic we got to leave alone. Just let it stand there and go, man, I really would like to talk about what if they had killed them, before that last year, because that's one point I guess I could have made when we were talking generally about Malcolm X legacy. It's like what's interesting about it is that, I mean, for I think for most people, I mean, the most of his legacy is that really short period of time after he leaves after he's forced out of the Nation of Islam until they kill him, less than a year later. Anyway, I'm saying that on free time. We can't talk about it. We don't have time. Um, um, all right, let's listen to Malcolm again, and then that'll take us into hour number 2 when we talk about Malcolm X, Religion and the Nation of Islam. But first, let's hear from our man again. Hopefully this will play because I got shook that last video I tried to play.
Now, in this country, you have 22 million African Americans. That's what we are. Africans who are in America. You nothing but Africans. Nothing but Africans. It's harder calling yourself an African than calling yourself Negro. Africans don't get no hell. You don't want to get hell. You don't have to pass civil rights bills for Africans. African can go anywhere you want. Right now, all you got to do is hang your head up. Go anywhere you want. Just stop being a Negro. Change your name to Hooga the Hooga. White man is. You dealing with a silly man. Friend of mine was very dumb. Put a turban on his head and went into a restaurant in Atlanta before they called themselves desegregated. And he went in a white restaurant. They sat down, they served him. And he said, what would happen if a Negro come in here? There he's sitting up there black as night. Head wrapped up. The waitress looked at him.
I don't know for sure, but still, I'm pretty sure that friend of his who was very dark is Dick Gregory. That sounds very much like a Dick Gregory joke. I think it might be. That doesn't take nothing away from Malcolm's delivery of it. And if it was his original, fine. But that sounds like a Dick Gregory joke, to be honest with you. Anyway, Malcolm was the man. All right, let's get into this second hour, quote unquote hour, where our topic is Malcolm X, Religion and the Nation of Islam. All right, I just said a couple of minutes ago that, like, for a lot of people, maybe not everybody, but for a lot of people, his legacy really is, when he was on his own, right? And that's a period that lasts less than a year. But for a lot of people, once again, not everybody, like some of the more, popular, well-known clips of him speaking, whether audio or video, kind of relate to that period when he's on his own, all right, I'll stop there. Having said that, I mean, the vast majority of Malcolm X's public career was, in fact, as a minister of the Nation of Islam, overwhelmingly. And so even today, let me stop with all these asides. So anyway, I mean, so much of an examination of Malcolm X's life and career is very rich in fundamental questions that really get beyond even his specific case and just into some general questions about things like organization, things about the role of religion in any sort of actual liberation, the role of patriarchy. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to get into a few of these things in this next hour, as we, like I said, we focus in on, Malcolm, religion, and the Nation of Islam. So our first topic, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, lady and gentlemen, let's go to something that Alex Haley reports Malcolm X Malcolm X saying in 1964 in some of those interview sessions that produced the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so this is after Malcolm has been expelled from the Nation of Islam, and there's a whole lot we ain't going to be able to get into it all. But this is an exact quote that Alex Haley from page 411 of the autobiography says. And so I want to start here in terms of how we view the role of that organization in the Malcolm X story. All right, let me read this paragraph for you. And at another time there in the hotel room, he came the nearest to tears that I ever saw him. And also the only time I ever heard him use for his race one word. He had been talking about how hard he had worked building up the Muslim organization in the early days when he was first moved to New York City, when abruptly he exclaimed hoarsely, "We had the best organization the black man's ever had. Niggers ruined it." Well, the first thing I want you all to react to is, his quote. What do you think of this? What do you think of the actual content of what he's saying there? Do you have any? Do you agree with that? Or anyway, what do you do with that? I would have some things to say, but what do y'all have to say about that? His conception of this.
I'll go first. Nostalgia. This is in a period in which Malcolm is trying to chart his path not only out of the Nation of Islam as an organization, but away from their backward theology. And so, there's a sense of nostalgia when you look at the nature of the formation, its size, the fruit of Islam, the business organization, that Malcolm looked upon those things still somewhat favorably in terms of black folks doing for themselves. But let's make no mistake, the Nation of Islam could not possibly, under any understanding, be considered the best or even an organization that we should look toward in the future. The theology is developed at a moment in which we don't have a broad-based understanding of African-American history. So the position it takes on Christianity is simply ideological, right? Christianity has indeed had a negative impact on black folk, but at the same time, the major leaders of the revolts by enslaved people were deeply Christian, right? Gabriel Prosser thought he was Samson. Turner thought he was Jesus. And so we're dealing with a level of understanding about African-American history that's at low tide, right? Understanding of African history that's at very low tide. If you read Elijah Muhammad in, The Supreme Something of Elijah Muhammad, he makes it very clear that he sees Africans as an inferior people. He talks about moving into East Asia and the hair kinking up. They have no respect for African culture. And that's broad across the black community, amongst black intellectuals. So Malcolm is responding at a time when the level of knowledge is low, and he's simply nostalgic. If you look at what he did, right? If he thought the Nation of Islam was the best organization black people had in 1964, why did he form the Organization of Afro-American Unity and not just keep the Muslim Mosque incorporated? That was the parallel to the nation. He obviously saw that there were elements in that, the stance toward women, right? That he shifts, his desire to be engaged in the struggle, that he shifts. So we all get nostalgic about things of the past that were not necessarily the best for us, but we just have fond memories about parts of it.
So, okay, I got you. So, I got you. All right. So, you disagree with Malcolm's assessment here. What does Jakia and Baba Zach think about this statement?
So I think,
Oh,
oh, go ahead,
okay.
you go ahead.
No. Oh, you
Okay.
read.
I think the statement is partially true.
What?
Yeah, I definitely think the statement is partially true. Now,
What?
you talk about the nation, that's the perception of the nation, in my opinion, is subjective, right? So like, I'm not looking at it from like a theological position or anything like that, but I'm thinking about, this is why I say partially, right? But I'm thinking about what the nation actually did for Black communities. And I'm speaking about in this specific time, the nation did something for, I think, our psyche that many organizations simply couldn't do, right? Because the nation was so organized, because they did work in the community as well. These were things that, other organizations did bring people together, but the nation just did things in a different way. So I think that him saying the best organization for the Black men's ever had, that's his personal opinion. He can have that opinion, right? And I think that I don't think any critique is invalid at all. So I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that, but I'm saying I can understand the perspective if you're comparing it during this time of like which organization was not just building Black people or not trying to build Black people as it relates to let's say political involvement in the United States, but also Black identity.
What you think, Baba Zach? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, now I was gonna say, but the ending part of niggas ruined it, that's definitely true. So I mean that piece again, as far as like the psyche of Black people, and like we know his tear from Elijah Muhammad, like that's what he's talking about, right? That was a really big piece, and and that hurt, and I think that hurt a lot of people, because so many people had put in trust in the nation, even if they weren't a part of the nation. They trusted the nation, right, in different ways. So again, the best organization is subjective, but I think as far as the organization being ruined, about people ruining the organization, it's not necessarily the structure of the organization in general, but maybe what the organization meant to the community, and that was tarnished.
It's your turn, Baba.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. First, I think we need to put this in context. At this time, Malcolm is angry because not only had he helped to build this organization and to structure the organization, during this time period, the organization had also deemed him the chief hypocrite, their chief enemy, and the organization during this time period on several occasions had members who were trying to kill him. So I think first and foremost, we need to put it in that type of context. Now, I would not overly state the whole, what's the term, best damn organization part and stuff. I think what Malcolm is basically saying here is that they had something special within the Nation of Islam. And I think specifically, he was talking about the organization, he was talking about the structure, he was talking about the eternal dynamics within the Nation of Islam. I don't think he was referencing the outside world, particularly the African village, because the nation had a presence within the African village, but the nation was not active when it came to our struggle. I think their greatest contribution during this time period, dealt more with imagery and, of course, their own eternal economics with Muhammad Speaks and selling the bean pies and those types of things. But the nation was not active in our struggle, which, of course, is one of the reasons why ultimately Malcolm, was ousted, from the movement, because the nation, they talk tough, as Malcolm used to say, but they don't, or as other critics used to say, but they don't really do anything. I think that the Baba made a good point when he talked about the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, because that was basically Malcolm's new organization. He patterned it after the nation, but it's real clear that he wanted to add correctives to the things that he thought the nation was not about. Like, for example, the MMI, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, they were basically a black nationalist organization. And so one of the first things Malcolm tried to do was to merge struggle and politics into his new organization. Well, yeah, I think that was a corrective. So certainly, Malcolm could see when he was in the organization, he could see the contradictions inside the Nation of Islam. He could see the problems inside the Nation of Islam. And I think that, the best organizations, stuff like that, I think as much as Malcolm critiqued the Nation of Islam, it's too many other statements that he said that we know he said, either in speeches or in interviews or in other things, that certainly tells me that, figuratively, he wasn't really saying that this was the best organization. So I don't particularly buy even that that's what he meant, because in his critiques, once he was out the Nation of Islam, it's real clear to me that, that he had a lot of problems with it when he was inside the Nation of Islam.
That's a fact. That's
Kim,
a fact.
let me say this.
Make it quick now.
If this interview had occurred the week that he was assassinated, he wouldn't have said that.
Oh yeah. It's a fact. It's a fact. But no, I agree with a great deal of what you all said there. I mean, not so much what Jakia was saying. I think I'd probably disagree with a whole bunch of what you were saying. But no, right on. I'm glad you got it into the conversation. What did I want to say? Well, yeah, I mean, y'all said a lot, so I don't want to add a whole lot, just to say that even in terms of going forward, right, even after he decides, right, Muslim Mosque Incorporated, it's not going to be sufficient. I think one of the problems that you had by virtue of him, like, being a preacher, coming up in a religious organization and such, and this is something that he didn't outgrow because he didn't have a chance to, but beyond religion, like and hoodoo and mysticism, but you got the autocratic model, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's religion is like, somebody has the word of God and everybody else follows. And Malcolm is still talking late in his life. He's still talking about not the people in his organization, but his followers. So I agree a lot of what you all said. Obviously, I completely disagree with Malcolm's assessment here because anyway, let me stop. We got a lot of
stop. No, I want to hear what part of the assessment. I mean, this is a very short quote, so there ain't much here. So please tell us. I mean, I think that adds some depth to the conversation.
Well, I mean, I think it would come out generally in our conversation, but like a religious organization is not leading nobody to no kind of liberation. Anything based on like somebody saying they got some like special authentic word of God, a relationship to the word of God, and an organization is built around the pronouncements of somebody saying that, somebody being an oracular figure, that is all, from my standpoint, I start to use the vernacular. That is all from my standpoint, no good, counterproductive. There's no connection between like this kind of mysticism and anything that we would call liberation. There's no liberation that's based on somebody going, oh, so-and-so has the word of God and we should follow this person. And by the way, it's always a man. So that's kind of what I meant.
I know you say you disagree with me, but I actually agree with you on that. I actually agree with you. So like I said, like I didn't see this as like the best damn organization. That's his personal opinion, and I don't really have an opinion on that. Like, so I'm not agreeing or disagreeing on that piece, but I'm just saying, like, as a symbol of organization, right? Like, I'm just saying there was some trust built in the community. That was basically all my point.
That's right on. Like I said, I mean, this is a conversation that we're having. We're covering a lot of ground, and like I say, I really do feel that each of these particular prompts are worthy of really extended conversation. We're going to do it
Right.
like in what, 10 minutes or
Yeah.
something like that. So we're going to leave
Yeah.
everything on the ground here. Yeah,
Excuse me, Bob.
Bob.
If it's possible, I would like. I'm trying to understand Sudiala's last point about had Malcolm been killed during his last week, that he would have said something different. Could you elaborate on that? I want to understand your point.
So the point that I'm making is that by the time Malcolm is assassinated, he has a non-sexist public policy. The OAAU has empowered women. Women are in charge of many of the committees, and that's one of the problems that the brothers in the MMI have with the OAAU. Malcolm is clearly in the direction of socialism. I don't know if he's become a socialist, but he's anti-capitalist. The Nation of Islam is nothing but capitalist even today. They still worship capitalism. So I don't see where Malcolm could have, given his growth, had he assessed the Nation of Islam at that point, it's too much the opposite of the direction that he wants to go in.
And I thought you were going to say he's experienced all these attacks. That they bombed his house. They've got him out of his house. They've tried to assassinate him. I thought you were saying just that.
Yeah, no. I wasn't going to go to the emotional way because that would not necessarily demonstrate that the Nation of Islam was or wasn't the best damn organization. That would be his personal, they came after me. And while that's valid, I don't think that's how we have to make decisions.
Okay.
We have to make decisions on more objective criteria. That's what I was trying to say.
You're right. No, that's cool. Well, let's move on. Let's get to kind of a fundamental topic. So, I mean, because this is really one, I think this in Baba Zak Kondo, your book, which is what, 1994? Is that when Conspiracies comes
93. So I think
93?
It would be 25 this year.
Wow.
Okay. No,
it's currently being revised.
That's like 32 or something.
32 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been revised though, so it should probably be out this spring.
Oh, okay. Well, right on. So you spent a lot of time on this relationship between the Malcolm and the Nation, and you spent a lot of time showing how different government forces certainly manipulated conflicts between them, and so that's certainly a part of the story. And so I want to go to what I guess a kind of a fundamental question that not just your work raised, but certainly that I think is a part of what you have to say in the book. So I'm gonna ask you first, and everybody else can get in. So was Malcolm, in your view, was Malcolm X's expulsion from the Nation of Islam a negative outcome?
Well, I mean, I would think that would depend upon from whose lens, are we?
Your lens, Baba Zak A. Kondo's lens. Although you don't wear glasses, at least you ain't got none on right now.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you're asking me personally, I think the short answer is yes, because what it did was it allowed Malcolm to spread his wings. It allowed Malcolm to.
Yes, it was a negative outcome. Yeah.
No, I'm talking about for our people.
Right.
For African people, I think it was a positive outcome.
Just clarifying.
Because what it did was it allowed Malcolm to basically be removed from that structure. And I think that structure within the nation never allowed Malcolm to really participate in our struggle. It never even allowed Malcolm, even from an intellectual standpoint, Malcolm had to tote the party line. He could not say things, when he was in the nation that he was able to say within a month after he was out of the nation. Why? Because the nation was a closed society. The Nation was the organization that basically you had to tote the line of Elijah Muhammad. And if you didn't tote the line of Elijah Muhammad, then you would basically be what they call set down, or you would be, isolated, or you would be suspended, or you would basically be banished. So no, I think for
you
Malcolm,
beaten and killed. Shit.
yeah. So I think for Malcolm, for our people too. For our people, the best thing that could have happened for Malcolm was basically to be ousted from the movement. I guess, if we're going to stay on this line, I would add this as well. Maybe it would have been better if he could have been ousted earlier, so that he could have, had more time to chart his course and to really begin to to make a dent in our struggle. So yeah, in my opinion, yeah, it was a good thing for him to be ousted from the Nation of Islam.
I bet the rest of y'all are going to agree with Baba Zach there, ain't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were the main one I really wanted to address that. I figured for the other two, it really wouldn't even be a complicated question. I figured for you, it'd have a little degree of complication. But maybe I saw Jakia's mouth move. Maybe she's got something. No, not really.
No, I was agreeing. The only thing I would add is, and this is a little deviation from the question, but the only thing I would add is that I personally think that it's remarkable, spectacular that after being ousted, he didn't give up. And I'm saying this is because, even going back to the last quote, this is something that was very painful on a very personal and emotional level. And I mean, we're humans, right? And we have to continue to humanize Malcolm X as well. And this could have defeated him, to have put so much love, so much energy, so much time, so much sacrifice into an organization and into a belief of an organization. So I'm leaving the religious part out, but the belief of this organization and what it can do, and to just kind of find out that a lot of what you had been told was really a lie. I mean, as an individual, that could have totally defeated him, but instead, I mean, he took his time and ended up being motivated, ended up being fueled. And I mean, I just personally think that also just adds to why we see him in such great regard.
Yeah, I mean, well, I just make 2 points and we'll actually move on to the next point. I mean, so on the one hand, it's hard to see him ever having left the organization. So when we speak of him being ousted, you know what I mean? There's that. But it's hard to imagine, I mean, him actually leaving the organization because he already had enough reasons to leave it before they kicked him out, actually. But the other point I would make is that, I mean, from everything, who we consider Malcolm to be, I mean, it was an absolute inevitability. Not only was it not a negative outcome, it was both an inevitability and a necessity. And this is kind of the point I was making a little bit earlier when I'm saying here's a guy who had really a long public career, but really for the people who admire him the most, it's really the last, what is that, like 11 months or less that he's alive that really forms more of the core of his legacy than, all the years that went before. So yeah,
Respond to that, Shakima.
I'm sorry.
For us,
I can't hear you. You kind of broke up there. I didn't catch you. What you were saying.
for us on the panel, I think that we see those last 18 months.
18? That's more like 11.
Excuse me?
Uh-oh. I think you said 18 months. I'm going from like when they kicked him out to the end, which is like 11 months.
Is it
Or
11?
you going back earlier?
Yeah, it was he was
It's 11 from
his official date was March the 8th, and then assassinated February 21st. So yeah, it was 11 months.
Okay. So I would push back a little bit because I think the message to the grassroots strikes a different political position, but the last year or so,
Yeah, I give you that for sure.
what I see is that Malcolm, what he provides us with, and I've kind of lost the last statement you made, Takimi, is what I want to disagree. Can you refresh my memory? I'm an old man.
I am too. What makes
Yeah,
you
me-
think I remember
me
what I
too.
just said?
It's
What
that
makes you think I remember what I just said? What is he talking about?
I think that
Okay, I remember. I said two things. He never would have left, probably, or maybe he never would have left. And I said it was an absolute necessity. At least that's what I remember saying. It was an absolute necessity. Because anyway, let me stop. Hey, man, forget about what I just said. Let's move on
yeah, let's move on.
because I don't even remember. All right. Well, let's stay with this Nation of Islam piece a little bit. So, we've been talking about how, yes, he becomes a part of this organization, a major part of it, really believes in it, etc. But that over time, he definitely has his some serious, disappointments. And one of the major ones, and a lot of people who study his story say, really, after the Ronald Stokes case, it was really inevitable. After when the cops break in and kill and shoot up the mosque and kill Ronald Stokes and injure these other Muslims, and Malcolm is saying, "Hey man, we've been talking all this talk. So let's retaliate." And Elijah Muhammad says, "No, we're not going to do that. We're going to let the courts play out for us." That this is really one of the big alienating moments for Malcolm. And so I want to come back to that point there as well. So here we are in 1962, the cops have shot up the mosque. And Malcolm is saying, listen, we got this paramilitary organization anyway. We got all this training. Presumably there was some training in firearms, but most of you know about hand-to-hand combat. Hey, if we're who we say we are, we're going to take out some LA cops. And Elijah Muhammad says, hell no, we ain't, son. You think I want to go back to jail? And so, some of us who are really sympathetic to Malcolm's cause may say, Malcolm was right. Elijah Muhammad, the old man conservative, was wrong. And maybe we all have that position, maybe not, but I'm asking it. I'm asking it to you all now, looking back at that moment, if you will. Who was right, the old man or the young firebrand?
So, Takimi, I disagree with your formulation of the question, but I need to bring it back to provide me with the proper historical information. My understanding is that Malcolm's initial response was, let's mob up and let's go take out some police, but that he ended up getting introduced to Cyril Briggs, the founder of the African Blood Brotherhood in 1919. And that Cyril Briggs, being an old communist, my understanding is that he convinced Malcolm that build a broad-based anti-police brutality movement, and that Malcolm began to put his energies there, and even was working with white folks to build a broad-based anti-police brutality movement. And he was doing that into July. And then Elijah Muhammad said, it won't go well for the brothers if we continue this, and then said, let's leave it to the courts. Is Cyril Briggs's interaction with Malcolm correct the way I described it, Zach?
Yeah, well, my understanding is that it's a little bit exaggerated.
Okay.
Malcolm did have some contact with Briggs. I think, in my view, I think the best way to put this in some type of context is to look at it first and foremost from the standpoint that Malcolm was very emotional. Remember, him and Stokes were close. Stokes was Malcolm's boy. Malcolm helped to, appoint him to the position that he held, which was, secretary of the mosque. And Malcolm's real close to him. And so it stung Malcolm initially from the personal standpoint. But then after that, Malcolm's thing was, okay, they took out one of our brothers. We're constantly, trying to present this image in the village that Muslims don't take shit. You can't vomit on Muslims. Other people, might take it, but not the Muslims. So now this was an opportunity, in Malcolm's view, this was an opportunity for them to finally basically practice what they preached. To go back to what you said earlier, Baba, all the training and the practice and all these things. Now's the time to put it in some type of context. Now, what context did Malcolm want? Well, it depends upon what period are we talking about. Initially, Malcolm wanted basically emotional revenge.
Right.
Okay, just plain and simple. Remember, Malcolm was a street man. Malcolm was a gangster. So that was his initial thing. But then, as time started soothing a little bit and rationality, entered the picture and stuff, then Malcolm's position was, okay, we can strategize on what the response should be, but there needs to be a response. So that's what he was putting pressure on Elijah Muhammad. And then part of the problem that would happen is this: Malcolm would talk to other members of the nation, particularly, some of his closer ministers and others. And sometimes he was critical of Elijah Muhammad. He was critical. He would say, look, we really need to be able to respond, but the messenger is tying our hands. The messenger is holding us back. Well, that would get back to Elijah Muhammad. This was the type of stuff that the FBI was exploiting. Any type of disagreement or challenges between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad, the nation tried to exploit it and stuff. And so ultimately, the way this whole process ends is that the nation does not respond,
Right.
but it also creates more tension between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad on different levels. Simply because, Elijah Muhammad knew that Malcolm was dissatisfied. Of course, Malcolm told him he was dissatisfied, but that was one problem. But there was another problem that we also got to bring in here. It's also going to impact how Malcolm viewed Elijah Muhammad, because probably more than there were some other events, but this was a major event that Malcolm really started having his doubts, and he would tell confidants, people that he trusted, who may not have been inside the nation, that, he was questioning, whether or not Elijah Muhammad really was about what he had them teaching that he was about. So in the end, this proved to be, really a major watershed in the relationship between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. And that was 62. But then in 63, there are a whole bunch of other things that's going to be going on that the FBI is going to exploit even more so. So in many ways, like in my book, I make the point, that, as you begin to examine the tension and the ultimate break between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad, you have to factor in the Stokes killing, because it's going to ultimately have a great impact.
I would add to that is that plane carrying 121 white folks out of Atlanta that crashes has an impact, because Elijah told Malcolm that we leave this to Allah. And when the plane crashed, right, Malcolm said, Allah be praised for killing our enemies. And Elijah told him, don't say that. And Malcolm was like, this is our basic understanding of the world. So I think that was also impactful. And those two things being so proximate in time.
Yeah, but I would also add this too there. If we're going to look at the whole time concept, let's go a year later and it's the chicken coming home to roost. I think it's, I think it was just, how do we say this? It's kind of like it was a series it was a series of events that I wouldn't say that they caused the split between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. But I think what they did was these events showed the weaknesses in their relationship. Because I think what we generally assume in all of this is, and I talk about this too, is how close they were and how Malcolm admired him. And he was the son that Elijah Muhammad never had. And so it was this extraordinary partnership. But I think there was always some issues that Malcolm had with him and issues that he had with Malcolm. And I think ultimately, as you get into 62, as you get into 1963, these types of tension, these issues are going to basically come to the fore.
Yeah.
Well, let's as time is moving on, so there's a lot more we could do with that. But that was a good little conversation about it. Let's move on. So, as everybody knows, Malcolm X is murdered on February 21st, 1965, by members of the Nation of Islam. The story of Malcolm's assassination and the possible involvement of other forces has been a major part of talking about Malcolm X. I think Malcolm X, there's something unfortunate about Malcolm X's legacy, in which, I just feel like there's actually been too much attention paid to his murder rather than to his life, even though his murder certainly raises some serious issues. I think there's also a form of death porn with Malcolm. How many times have we seen the pictures of that dude dead, on that stretcher or on the Audubon ballroom floor? I'm like, why do you keep having to show me this? But anyway, Malcolm X was certainly assassinated. And the Nation of Islam, right? We know their role in it. So let's hear from Louis Farrakhan speaking about Malcolm, his murder, and the Nation of Islam from 1993. This is like almost 30 years after these events. Here's Louis Farrakhan talking about it.
Yeah, I love Elijah Muhammad enough that if you attack him, I have to kill you. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I'm not a killer, but neither are you. But if somebody attack what you love, each one of you in here would become a killer instantaneously. Am I lying? Mother, let somebody look like they're attacking your child. Here's a woman who fought a bear because the bear snatched her baby. And she ran the bear down, screaming until the bear dropped her baby. Love casts out fear. We don't give a damn about no white man law when you attack what we love. And frankly, it ain't none of your business. What have you got to say about it? Did you teach Malcolm? Did you make Malcolm? Did you clean up Malcolm? Did you put Malcolm out before the world? Was Malcolm your traitor or was he ours? And if we dealt with him like a nation deals with a traitor, what the hell business is it of yours? You just shut your mouth and stay out of it. Because in the future, we're going to become a nation. And the nation got to be able to deal with traitors and cutthroats and turncoats. The white man deals with his. The Jews deal with theirs. Salman Rushdie wrote a nasty thing about the prophet, and Imam Khomeini out a death thing on him and it stands today. A certain path you don't cross.
I don't, yeah, react to it. I don't need to say anything more. That clip speaks for itself, as they say in the hood, 100%. Y'all ain't got nothing to say. We can move on, really.
No. I mean, it's just that, somebody like me, I've heard that speech more than I need to, and he basically goes on to make the point that that every community had zealots, and that basically he blames Malcolm's assassination on the zealots, and that basically Malcolm got what was due him. Malcolm got what was basically coming to him. Now, of course, down the road, he's going to kind of like retract that he ever said that. And of course, today, they have a group of young brothers in the current nation, and it seems like it's their job now, to come up with schemes and mirrors and and magic to try to exonerate the nation, to make it seem as though the nation had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination. Basically, to say that something might have killed him, but the old nation, had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination. And it's hard to do for these young brothers because they got Farrakhan not just in this speech, but there were some other speeches as well during that same period and stuff, in which he's basically bragging that the nation killed Malcolm. So he makes it difficult for his minions to try to, put out the argument that the government killed him and they killed him and they killed him, but the nation didn't have nothing to do with it.
Were you done, Zach?
Yeah, I'm done.
I think it's important to analyze the whole statement. It's clear where we stand on calling for the murder of someone because of a critique, right? But if we listen to the way in which Farrakhan frames the argument itself, it reveals that we're dealing with a millennial cult, a millenarian cult. So he begins by comparing what a mother would do if a bear attacked a child to Malcolm making a critique of Elijah Muhammad. How the hell, in what world, in what sane mind do those two things become equivalent? They're not equivalent.
Right.
Right? And then
No.
after setting up that kind of false connection, he then goes on, and this is missing too. Didn't he love Malcolm? Malcolm trained him. And in terms of how Malcolm became Malcolm, my argument is that Elijah Muhammad gets too much credit. You can find sermons by Malcolm in the 1950s, right? I found a 1958 sermon where Malcolm begins using the theological rhetoric of the NOI, talking about a righteous nation of God and all of that. But then in the second half of the speech, he switches from things like kingdom of God to talking about colonial imperialist nations, right? And he takes that theology and gives it a real presence in political economy because he shifts the discussion to talking about oppression, colonialism, imperialism. No other Nation of Islam minister is doing that. And the fact that Malcolm could do that in the late 1950s is not a product of Elijah Muhammad. It's a product of his reading while he was in prison. It's a product of his reading and his relationship with Mishaw and the bookstore. It's a relationship of his interaction with Kenneth Clark. It's his interaction with James Farmer. It's his broader world that he's engaged in that the other Muslims are isolated from. Malcolm made Malcolm.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And just say one more thing. I gave a speech in 1993 at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the Nation of Islam of Kansas City, they came and they took up all the front row, and I made those points. And afterwards, they invited me to a conversation. And so me and the people with me, 4 other folk, we went and sat and had a dialogue with them. And at a certain point, their minister had the Fruit of Islam encircle us. We got up and left, and one of the guys had grown up with a friend of mine, and he said, an ill wind is blowing. And the next thing we knew, the Fruit of Islam was coming after us. We managed to get to our car, but if we hadn't gotten to our car, it would have been a beat down. And so we got to deal with the aspect of the nation, that kind of ideological thuggery.
You got anything you want to add, Jakia, on the whole like Nation of Islam bragging about killing Malcolm and all of that?
Yeah, actually, when I was much older when I first saw this clip, and it might sound weird, but it just is also very similar to Suge Knight's message to the kids when he was in prison. Like, this is not a message to the kids. You're saying something else. But I think about what Louis Farrakhan in this is you're presenting this as a sermon, right? Right. This isn't a sermon, right? This isn't a message to the kids. So, I mean, I think this can go into the conversation about like the conversation that we had not so long ago, just about religion in general, because what's happening here is that they're using this religious organization as an excuse, right? Like, oh no, it's okay. Our actions are okay. And I'm like, at the end of the day, all that happened was they were very jealous of Malcolm because he was well read, because he was articulate, and because he was strategic. And that doesn't mean that he was perfect, but at the end of the day, they were just jealous. And Louis Farrakhan has always been, I've never liked that man personally, not that I know him, but everything I see about him, I don't like. Everything I hear him say, I also don't like. And I would say it just makes me uncomfortable that today, this man still goes viral on social media and stuff for his different speeches and stuff. And I'm like, how do we not know who this person is?
How is he still moving around at age 92 though? That's what I don't get. But that's amazing.
He is. Yeah, he is.
He's over 90. He's over 90.
Yeah.
And I saw a picture of him from a year or two ago. You really wouldn't know it. So, if anybody here knows the Oscar Wilde story, The Picture of Dorian Gray, I think there could be some relevance there. But listen, we out of time. I gotta let this go, man. I see you chomping at the bit, Sundiata. We got to move on. I got to cut half of what I had in hour 2 on the whole question of religion. I even need to look over. I need to skip over this one. But you know what? I'm gonna let us do this for a couple of minutes because I think I can already envision some pushback from at least a couple of you. So, Malcolm X certainly defined himself throughout his life, as a religious man, as a minister, even though he definitely tries to get ecumenical, still fundamentally, that was a part of his whole persona. That's why he really conceived of like leaders and followers. He got all that stuff. So, anyway, as the prompt says, so once we start talking about Abrahamic religion, that can't be separated from patriarchy, man. So this Malcolm X that exists for so many people, can this Malcolm X, this religious faith, can he exist without this patriarchy? Can we separate Malcolm X from like this inherent patriarchy that's so much a part of, like I say, the religious persona, and therefore, really so much of what he would have to say throughout most of his career? Anybody who wants that one? Sundiata, since you were chomping at the bit for the last one, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Malcolm is in transition. And certainly, had he still shared the Nation of Islam's perspective toward women, he would not have run the OAAU the way that he did. Women were empowered to lead committees. And I think when he went to Africa the second time, he left a woman as co-leader of the OAAU in terms of decision making. So I think Malcolm was grappling. We've got that famous statement where he says that nations that are progressive is because the woman is progressive. Now, that needs to be unpacked a little bit more, but I think Malcolm is beginning to rethink many of his old positions. So I do believe that had he not been assassinated, it's possible that he could have grown much further away from the patriarchy in terms of a public position. I don't know if he was ever going to do the dishes.
I heard that. I heard that.
Position.
Yeah.
And I agree with you say. The only thing, let me just, so I agree with you. At the same time, I think this gets back to one of the points we were making in the first hour, how, Malcolm is indivorceable from all these things we feel that might have happened. So people talk about the afterlife. There's that. So anyway, that's what I thought of. Somebody was going to say something. Was it you, brother?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in. But keep this in mind, though, we shouldn't be talking just about the patriarchy of the nation, but we also need to be talking about the patriarchy of Sunni Islam, which is what Malcolm embraced, because basically both of these movements were patriarchal. You can make an argument, not just were they patriarchal, but they were, a misogynist in some extent when it came to women. So what I would say is this: despite both his foundation with the nation and despite his embracement of Sunni Islam, Malcolm demonstrated, despite both of these entities, he demonstrated that he understood that sisters were vital to struggle, that sisters were vital to organizations, that sisters were vital to nations. And therefore, part of his legacy was to say, despite all the patriarchy, because remember, the civil rights movement, as we call it, was one of the most patriarchal movements in our history. Women, they didn't even want sisters speaking, the damn March on Washington and just all types of things. But here's the thing, though. Malcolm proved that despite the patriarchy that engulfed him in his religious choices, he understood the necessity and the importance of African women. So I think that, to me, represents one of the things that separated Malcolm from everybody else, particularly during that time period, because we're going to get other organizations are going to be born, but in many ways, none of these other organizations are going to, to provide women an outlet. And remember, Malcolm didn't have a lot of time to do it either, so it would have been real interesting had he lived longer.
Yes.
But I think that was one of the important, legacies of Malcolm X, is that he understood that serious struggle required both sisters and brothers working together, and do your best to minimize the hierarchy, that whole gender hierarchy stuff that we've been socialized to embrace.
Jakia, you get the last word on this. He says, pointing
Okay.
to Sundiata.
Okay. No, I'm not disagreeing. I do think that to the point that the conversation is not only the Abrahamic religions, but then also this time, right? So we think about the civil rights movement being very Christian centered, right? Also Abrahamic religions, religious tradition, and how patriarchal they were, but also just considering this time period that we're in as well. But can Malcolm exist without it? I think the answer to that is yes. And the reason I think the answer to that is yes is because Malcolm could speak to anybody, which is not something that most people could do, right? So you can connect to him without the nation. You can connect to him as a person, which again, I think was part of the jealousy, right, that others had. He had street credit, others didn't. But I also think that another thing too is like, even if we look at today, going into this section of the 21st century, is that the patriarchy is also, again, outside of these religious, I would say these religious traditions, because if you look at all of the quote unquote public intellectuals, the Black public intellectuals, and I don't take any of them seriously, well, most of them not seriously, they're all men. I mean, now apparently Jamal Bryant is in the ring as a public intellectual. Now, I don't know, calling for boycotts. I guess he's the new leader of us here on this land. And you have others, but you don't see women in 2025 that are talking about African people that have a large following. Even though in the United States, Black women are the most educated, but we continue to go to these men as our public figures to go get our information from. So the patriarchy is there, I think, outside of the religious traditions, but in defense of Malcolm, he could stand on his own 2 feet, no matter what.
I think I agree with you. I agree with you. I do. Well, listen, like I say, I told you all weeks ago, and I knew it would happen. We're making all these cuts in these different topics we want to do. We're not necessarily going into all these conversations as deeply as we would like us. We're just starting the conversation, certainly not the end. And the other thing is that, I mean, Malcolm X as a figure is just an extraordinarily rich topic for exploration, for people to learn a lot, about like African Americans, about the 20th century, about the nature of the United States. And so it's almost close to an inexhaustible topic. You can just speak intelligently and explore intelligently so many aspects of life, certainly Black life, through looking at what this man had to say and what he went through in his whole career. So our 3, Malcolm X in the 21st century, we talked in the first hour about legacy, but here in this hour, well, it'll probably be less than an hour because we're running so far behind. But anyway, some consideration of, okay, in 2025, we know what our panelists, certainly know what he means to us and what he perhaps should mean to the society, to Black people, etc. But like, what does he mean? So, some images up there in terms of Malcolm X as a pop cultural figure, what a figure on like TV shows, what is this, comic books, and opera. I don't know what y'all think of that statue there. I'm not really digging that statue in the middle there as well. But anyway, Malcolm X in the 21st century. So I want to start here. And this is what I should have said in that very first question. When we were talking about Malcolm X's legacy, I left out what I really specifically should have mentioned in my little short, less than a minute take was, and he is the author of the autobiography of Malcolm X. Yeah, I know Alex Haley's there. I'm just saying. He's the figure in the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so I guess that leads to, I'll just put it as a question and have you all respond to it. So is the autobiography of Malcolm X still the core of Malcolm X's legacy today, as I think it would have been, 50, 60 years ago? Oh, who goes first? Baba Zach goes first.
Okay, is the autobiography still the core of Malcolm's legacy today? Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure that it should be.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is this. I think that the autobiography is an important book, no doubt. In fact, when I was in the 7th grade, I read it, and it put me on the trajectory that I've been on ever since. So I'm more than anything. In fact, my wife read the autobiography when she was 12 as well, and it put her on a trajectory. So on those levels, on the personal level, I don't think, that you find many people, who've been impacted as far as direction and guidance, as I have. So on that level, certainly I would never minimize the importance of the autobiography. At the same time, though, I think that we should also be sure to put emphasis on Malcolm's, on his speeches, on his, on the tapes that he made, on the interviews that he made. And part of the problem with the autobiography, which I didn't necessarily notice when I was a young person, but part of the problem with the autobiography, and we need to talk about this, is Malcolm never read the autobiography in its complete totality. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is we are forced to take Alex Haley's word for everything.
Yeah.
And we all know, or we all knew Alex Haley. And we knew, for example, that in Roots, Alex Haley would speak somewhere and he would talk about, his family roots and oral history and all of that. And graduate students and scholars would come up after the lecture and say, I really enjoyed your lecture. And it's interesting. I've been doing research in the Senegambia region, and I found this and that and this and that. And they give Alex Haley the sites, give Alex Haley the information. And then lo and behold, this information ends up in Roots as part of Alex Haley's oral traditional history.
True that.
So I'm saying that to make the point that we certainly should not leave simply to Alex Haley the final word as far as Malcolm's autobiography is concerned. But technically, we have no choice because of how everything happened. Because sometimes he would read bits and pieces. And in fact, Alex Haley tells you in the autobiography that one time he gave Malcolm a draft, and Malcolm brought back a whole lot of red marks where he corrected this or said, no, I didn't say that, or you misinterpret that, blah, blah. And then Alex Haley tells you that after that, he was reluctant to give Malcolm any more opportunities to go through it. Why? Because he didn't want Malcolm to mark it up or to make corrections. Well, whose story was this? Was this Malcolm's story?
Okay.
Or was it Alex Haley's story? So when you factor that into the picture, to me, it tends to, just remind us that the autobiography had its limitations because Malcolm, wasn't always in the driver's seat.
And Sundiata goes next.
All I 100% with Baba Zach.
I dug it too.
I would add this other point, which is that the autobiography stops before we see Malcolm make the tremendous transformation. So it doesn't really take up Malcolm's new ideas. And all of us, I've had a podcast for the last 3 years, Black Liberation Media Network, right? And I start with biographical information. How did you become a Black radical? How did you become a revolutionary? How did you become a nationalist? And everybody that's between, I would say, Baba Zach's age and my age, right? So that's about 15, 18 years, I think. They say they read the autobiography of Malcolm X. So there's still, even with the machinations of Alex Haley, there's a transformative power in that book. The only other book I know that has similar transformative weight is Asata, that autobiography, right? And so it will continue to move our people, but I would agree with Zach, we have to bring the speeches post autobiography. We've got to bring interviews and tapes and other things. His notebook. We got to put those things in the mix to round out the limitations of the autobiography. But there is a power there that's undeniable.
That leaves
So
our girl.
Yeah, so I think that I'm agreeing in that the autobiography is a part of the core, but the core still needs to be Malcolm's voice himself, because that's how we get to know the actual person. And I mean, and I think that for us, it was this person that spoke to us, right? That influenced us in very different ways that you get from an autobiography, despite the edits and things like that. Now, of course, we would supplement with other books and other journals and other analyses of different things. But I think that one of the things that makes Malcolm unique compared to a lot of other people is the way that his words really transcend and really touch people in a way that is I would say it's a gift. Really, it really is a gift. So the core of Malcolm X's legacy maybe doesn't need to be this single book, but it does need to be his voice.
Yeah, I heard that, and I agree with what you all said too, actually. What did I want to say? I mean, the question also kind of fits into another thing that we don't have time to get deep into, but like, are younger generations actually reading? Well, let me say that differently. Are younger generations actually reading books that they're not forced to, like by school systems? So, I mean, I also could be imagining, how it was, in our generation, but like, man, we would pick up a book if it were interested in us. But I don't think nobody picks up a book today unless they're forced to be honest. So that's a part of why, if I'm going around saying, damn, you think you know something about Black people and you ain't read the autobiography, I think that probably fits into a larger critique of, well, you've actually only read maybe, 2 or 3 books that you weren't forced to. I don't know. But that is, what's the word? Decreasing literacy or decreasing functional literacy, I think is a part of this conversation. So I like the critiques that y'all said. I certainly agree with them. And like I say, I'm certainly one of the example of one of those people who read it and it was really formative, to my identity. And so in light of that, I want to turn to, I'm sure Dr. Painter might say I'm being unfair, but I got to bring this up, man. I got to bring this up. So you all will remember, of course you all remember, that's almost 15 years ago when Manning Marable's book on Malcolm X came out. And then there were 2 books that came out, critiquing it. And so the great historian, Neil Irvin Painter, writes a review of a pretty positive review of the book. And like I say, we're not really here to get deep into Marable's book, but really this statement just continues to perplex me. The last sentence of her review of Marable's book. All right, and I got most of it up there, or I got the first part of it up there, but I want to read it. Like the autobiography it supersedes, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention is deservedly a bestseller, one that helps us understand the development of a leading American, struck down before he could help us understand our world in which Islam plays so crucial a role. And so, I mean, I'm not making a mountain out of a molehill. How does somebody say that there is some book which could come into existence which would supersede the autobiography of Malcolm X? I don't understand that formulation. That I'm utterly perplexed by an accomplished historian saying this book here supersedes the autobiography. As you can see, 10 years later, I'm still completely mystified by that. I'm almost as mystified by that as I am by, the basic orientation of Manning Marable's book. I guess this is an obvious question. I guess there's nothing to say. How can anybody say that this book gets superseded? Anyway, it perplexes me to this day, people. So I do bring it up from time to time. Manning Marable's. Oh, somebody's gonna say something.
No, actually, I was just laughing because I think part of the challenge with this is think about what did Painter and Marable have in common? Basically, they were both products of academia, and in academia, people are basically trained to think a certain way, to use certain languages, and to develop certain methodologies. And I think that Marable followed that. He followed that protocol real well. So why wouldn't somebody else, who has followed that same protocol, say that Marable's product supersedes a book like the autobiography, which, because it's an autobiography, it didn't follow none of those protocols and stuff. So for all practical purposes, it breaks in many ways all the rules of academia. So I would just look at this just from the standpoint of one hand in academia washing another hand in academia. And I wouldn't put any more faith in it beyond that. Just like, for example, you got people like Skip Gates wrote one of the blurbs for Marable's book.
Of course he did.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's like, for somebody like me, and I'm assuming, the other brothers and sisters on this panel and stuff, it's like, we don't put no damn weight on Skip Gates. It's like, that's like irrelevant. It's like, who cares? That's that's not gonna make a serious people go out and buy the damn book. So I'm just saying all that to say, to me, it just fits in with the culture, and let's just keep it moving.
But even if you aren't particularly influenced culturally, by the autobiography of Malcolm X, I mean, somebody like Painter could not have been unaware of the impact of that book culturally, within the Black community, such that you could say something that it could be superseded. I mean, it's mystifying, man.
Listen, Painter is the person who wrote the book about Sojourner Truth, in which she puts forward without evidence the argument that Sojourner Truth was a lesbian.
Oh, really?
This fits perfectly with the kind of iconoclastic role that she saw herself playing. And I would suspect that Painter never saw the value of a Malcolm X.
Gotcha.
And if you go through and you look at the reviews on the Marable book, you're going to see a very clear ideological line that emerges. Nationalists and Black Marxists, for the most part, particularly those who did not have a close personal relationship with Manning, denounced the book. I tried to be balanced in the piece that I did for both the Black Scholar and for Jared Ball's edited collection, of Reinvention. Yep. But at the end of the day, it's a book that is full of so many flaws that the idea that it became a bestseller, right, and won awards is actually almost frightening if you don't understand that it provides an image of Malcolm that is useful for the capitalist state and imperialism. I just leave it at that.
Yeah, and white nationalism as well.
Yeah, white nationalism. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Think about this. The portrait that Marable painted of Malcolm was very accommodating to the white liberals, very accommodating, even to just white people, you know, white moderates,
Yeah.
and also to Africans who were moderates, or in some cases Africans who were conservative. You know, the Malcolm that came out in that book was the type of person, the way you know, the way that it was portrayed, that white people could sit down and feel comfortable with, that Negroes could sit down
Oh,
and feel comfortable with. And I think that's why you give books like that awards
yeah.
and make it a bestseller. It's no threat. Black, you know, the serious Black Malcolm X isn't coming through the pages of Marable's book.
There's no, the revolutionary is not in that book.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
No,
So it makes sense.
It's very mystifying, really. Jackie, you want to, anyway, if you do anything, yeah, let's move on. All right, so I'm cutting some more things because we got to wind it on down. It's already 4 o'clock, even though we started half hour. I'm gonna try to, you know, definitely get out of here by 4:30. Anybody got to leave like real soon right now? Got a few more minutes?
I got some papers to grade, but I'm good.
Okay, I heard that. Well, just a couple of more of these. Like I said, I knew we'd leave a lot of stuff on the table, and we're going to, like I said, we're certainly going to do some future editions of this. So anyway, we might have kind of touched on this a little bit, but like, what is the content of the Malcolm X icon in 2025? Like I say, we got comic books, we got T-shirts. I mean, we do have like the Malcolm X grassroots movement, which is a serious political organization. But like over here, I mean, I don't know, man. I'm not really comfortable with this. So here's this T-shirt, Malcolm X by any means necessary, in front of a U.S. flag, and you got this white fellow modeling it. I don't know about that, man. At that point, I don't know if Malcolm X has any meaning, is what I want to say.
Okay.
So I
So
can
for you all, what would you say is the content of?
So
okay, yeah, you go
it's
for
not
it.
just Malcolm that doesn't have much meaning. It's almost nothing. And
I'll give
part
you
of
that.
it is because people don't read books. Part of it is because if it's not on social media, then it almost doesn't exist in a way, because we aren't going to the source. So if someone isn't telling me something else that I'm like scrolling through and seeing on TikTok or Instagram or something like that, then I just don't know. So curiosity is actually lost. The art of curiosity is actually lost a bit, which makes it impossible to have any type of relationship with our ancestors, to have any type of relationship with historical figures. So so it's not just Malcolm, unfortunately. And then I think to the other piece too, which like I mean I said this earlier, is like people want to stick their chest out and pretend like they about that life, but at the end of the day, they want convenience. And struggle is any type of struggle, any type of inconvenience is too much. And if you can't stand in a space of learning, of growing, and not always consuming, then you'll never truly understand who any of these people are or what any of them stood for at any stage of their life, or what it means to you all. I like what it means to us today. So I think that this is just, people are making money because they like the idea of Malcolm X. They like the idea of going against the grain and going against the machine. They like that idea, even though push come to shove, they will never stand up. They will never raise their hand to be a part of it.
Let me, before the other panelists come in, because we haven't heard from him in a while, let's let Malcolm talk for about a minute or so.
For patriotic soldiers in defense of Kenya, their homeland, when the white man would go to them with his poem and say, "You belong to the Mau Mau?" They said, "I ain't never heard of the Mau Mau." You know, the white man is so naive. He actually expected that African to tell him that he was one. And the one who so faithfully told Boss, "I never heard of him, Boss." He got Boss's head when Boss went to bed. And so I tell him the same thing here in America.
Anyway, get my man in. I guess, anyway, you all have some points to make about well, I don't think the person saying that is part of the Malcolm X icon today, but what were y'all going to say?
Well, some of my concern, and I reiterate what the young sister said as well, that I think part of the problem is the lack of reading, with this current generation, and particularly, the generation came up during the pandemic, because I think all of us are educators, I'm assuming, and so we know this generation, and and there's a lot of non-reading going on, particularly of classic books, important to us. So for me, that is a concern, because then it leads us to people basically feeding off of the commercialization of Malcolm X through the t-shirts, through the X hats back in the 1990s and those things. But those things are not going to be substitutes for knowledge and, and facts and intellectualism. And I think that's what drove Malcolm's imagery, during the 60s, during the 70s, during the 80s, and even during the 90s, is that people were still reading, people were still studying, people were still taking notes and listening to tapes and reading Malcolm X Speaks and different things like that. And I am concerned, and not just with Malcolm, but with other African icons and historical figures as well, that we're upon a generation right now, unless we come up with some more, with some concrete solutions. I think that we are dealing with, with a generation right now in which the serious study when it comes to people like Malcolm is being reduced. So I am concerned.
I in the main, I agree with everything said by Sister Jakia and Baba Zach, but I would add a couple of things. And one is, I just kind of I'm going to butcher this quote from Lenin, but Lenin said that great revolutionaries lived two lives, one in which they were on earth and actually struggling, and then a second after they die when their enemies then take their ideas and position them as the opposite of what they stood and died for. And so it's, of course, we get this defanged civil rights Malcolm X. Of course, that's what we're getting. The problem is, I think, twofold in terms of response. The COVID generation, they don't read. And it's not just that these young people don't read, they're uncurious. They don't have curiosity.
Yep.
Now, we can respond to that. And one way to respond is that they're not going to read books, give them primary documents. Give them short documentary films. Give them film clips. Give them speeches by Malcolm, speeches by King. Give them that stuff. Give them the imagery of the Panthers, right? So we can respond to some degree, but at the end of the day, it will never amount to the depth that you get from engaging in struggle. One of the problems I've seen with this generation of Black scholars that have risen, I would say, post brother Kondo's generation is that they don't believe in reading books that are older than 5-6 years. So in their seminars, in their classes, they assign contemporary books.
I've noticed that.
And they feel like if a book is older than 10 years, it's been superseded. Well, Black Reconstruction has not been superseded, right? And we can go on and on. Now, personally, I find that the stuff that was written in the 30s and 40s, in the 60s and 70s, there's nothing that's been written in the 90s down that compares to the great works of those era, because those eras were eras of heightened struggle, and there's a relationship between the quality of the scholarship and the level of the struggle in terms of our people. And so I would go back and say that we've got to find ways to communicate with this generation that takes advantage of culture, film. You know, when Amiri Baraka said that the Spike Lee film, the reason he opposed it was because for a generation, there would never be another film on Malcolm X. We need a film on Malcolm X that takes us to the moment he dies, and that's done by a revolutionary, right? That's done by a revolutionary. We need to find ways to use the cultural mediums like Kendrick Lamar is doing to try and get at these people, but the aim has to be to push them back toward books.
Jackie, you got, did you, no, you already answered this question, didn't you? You already answered this question. All right, time is rolling up. Let me see. So we're talking about the what's the word? The content of the Malcolm X icon today. So so this story from Peter Goldman's 1973 portrait of Malcolm, the death and life of Malcolm X. He has this. Let me read a couple of sentences for you from this. So Whitney Young, I mean, y'all know who Whitney Young is. Maybe some people listening don't know, was the long-term leader of the National Urban League. So certainly somebody who would have been part of what they would call the quote-unquote mainstream civil rights movement, integration, capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Now we go. Whitney Young, quote, Whitney Young got a Malcolm X card one Christmas season from Amamu Amiri Baraka, then still Leroy Jones. It was meant as a token of unity, which Malcolm would have approved. But the fact that a nationalist like Baraka chose his image and an assimilationist like Young showed it around with pleasure suggested how little of Malcolm was left except his blackness and his sainthood. So, I mean, a little anecdote like that does suggest, and I think we made the point in the first hour that, as he becomes this icon who is now safely dead, I think Sundiata made that it applies to that Lenin quote that you just gave us, really, just in terms of you get bleached of all meaning there as well. Like, what does it mean for Whitney Young to be saying, yeah, here's my Malcolm X card? Anyway, so that kind of fits this conversation. All right, I just put this up on the screen just for you to look at. We don't have time, just as the caption says, we don't have time to talk about Malcolm X on TV in the movies. But this is one I wanted y'all to think about. So, and it fits right into our conversation. People need to read. So, what are some of the, in your view, absolutely essential texts about Malcolm X? I'll just go first and say those three in the middle there, I go there. The autobiography, Malcolm X Speaks, a collection of speeches, and the 1972 documentary, which is pretty much all Malcolm talking, well, mostly Malcolm speaking for himself, so you get the visual as well as the audio. If I had three, not that we're going to say you only get three, but if I had three, I had to just do three. I think those are the three I would go for. But what are some of the, I'll put some other titles up here. I'm not necessarily saying everything up here is absolutely essential. I would point to the Purple Book and say, I'll give that essential status. Conspiracies. But anyway, yeah, what are y'all, we wanted this thing on down. This is really our last actual topic. So since we were talking about like the importance of reading, what do y'all say about the critical text, the essential text? Who goes first? Sundiata goes first.
Okay. Man,
You needed more time on this prompt, didn't you?
this is difficult, brother.
I know. Hey, we'll go to somebody else and come back to you. How about that?
Biography is essential reading.
Oh, okay.
I think Malcolm X Speaks is essential. I do believe that if you want to know what happened, there's the best place to go is Brother Zach's Conspiracy. I think that's essential. I like poetry. So For Malcolm, I think, has some really good stuff in there. And I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay. I heard that. I guess I'm gonna go with Jakia next.
Yeah, I would go with your list to Kwame as well. Those three in the middle. But
Yeah.
I mean, partially for me, it's just because I think it's really important to sorry, Trey. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think it's really important to hear his voice and his perspective first and foremost.
Yep.
I just know, like, for me personally, I've read about people and had ideas about who they were. And then when I read their work or watched them in speeches or give talks, my views completely changed. So I'm very, that's why I'm always like, go straight to the source to get to know who they were as a person. So that's why I would agree with you on those three as well, to Kwame.
Okay. And that would do it? Nothing else you think of is like, hey, essential?
I mean,
there's a lot that's worth reading. That's a different topic.
Yeah, exactly. So worth reading, I don't know if any of these I would even necessarily cut out, honestly. To be fair. So I'm just
that's
like,
true.
what
that's
would
a different question.
Yeah,
no,
so I
right.
kind of chose it as what would I choose first?
Yeah,
more so than yeah.
That's the question. All right. People agree with my list. What you got, Zach?
Yeah, I would suggest that all of these are essential. I would add a few books by Peter Bailey, especially the one talking about Malcolm being a master teacher. Because I think that book, it was written on a personal level, but it just reminds you of some of the other special qualities that Malcolm possessed that we don't always put front and center. And that is Malcolm's people skills, Malcolm's ability to share and communicate, placed him in a very unique and a very special category. And I think that sometimes, we kind of overlook it or we downplay it. But I think that was one of the, attributes that Malcolm possessed, that really made him special. Like, I've interviewed a lot of people over the years who knew Malcolm, who talked about him, who, knew him on various levels, professionally or locally in Harlem and different things like that. And, Malcolm would teach without teaching. And I think that was part of his gift. He just had the ability to share information. And I think Peter Bailey's book on Malcolm's, being a master teacher, I think it basically, helps to, provide, strong foundation for that particular attribute.
All right, dig this. I dig this. So I might say that, okay, yeah, we definitely want the subject to speak for himself. Is there, well, no, that's not the right way to phrase the question. But should people read any particular like biography? Because, that'll add should are there any particular biographies? Because there's a bunch of them by now that you think anybody I guess should read? That's still kind of a weak question because I mean, all depending on how curious you are, you should read everything. But is there a biography that comes closest in your mind to okay, you really should kind of read that because you do want some sort of intelligent outside perspective on the man's life. Is there? There might not be. Maybe you say there ain't one.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, as a narrative, I really do like The Dead Are Rising, but I always got a lot of value out of a psychoanalytic biography, and I'm
The
searching
victims of democracy. The victims of democracy.
Victims of Democracy. I always found a lot of value in that. Yeah, you're looking at me like I'm crazy, but
No, I'm not looking at you like you're crazy. But yeah, I gotta say that book doesn't make any cut of mine. But I hear you. Hey, listen, I'm gonna say something, and y'all are gonna say, "Damn, this man is crazy." As fucked up as Marable's book is and was, for somebody who's serious about Malcolm X and actually has some grounding, like actually knows the story, it actually has a lot of valuable information. I'll say that. That's not an endorsement of the book, but that's just to say that the person who's really curious about Malcolm and has a intelligent eye can gain some, information. Like I say, if you're perceptive enough, you're going to reject a lot of his conclusions. But yeah, there's some value. There's some value in some of the documentary evidence on which he bases, in particular, I guess the relationship between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam. He's got all of this, he's got all of this documentation from, wiretaps and stuff, which is kind of useful. That's not an endorsement. That's just a statement on the blog. So like the other blog, I mean, there's stuff to learn, but I think I'm asking a different question in terms of what's useful to read as opposed to what's essential. So I'm not really asking the question of answering the question of what's essential when I say what I just said.
If I could personalize just for a second,
yeah,
the three books on the left at the top, when these were the three books in the same the
time period,
chronology.
Okay.
I'm thinking of work around chronology. But these were the three books when I was first reading autobiography. When I was 12, I started with the autobiography. Read that 3 times. Then I went to Malcolm X Speaks, and then Malcolm X, The Man and His Times. And I particularly recommend The Man and His Times because what that book did that was real special is they probably, it was like around 20 authors. And what they basically did was each of them gave you a side of Malcolm that was generally, independent of the other ones and stuff. Like, for example, this guy, Art Sears, he talked about Malcolm in the press. He was some type of journalist. And so he talked about his relationship with Malcolm and how Malcolm dealt with the press. And Earl Grant, one of Malcolm's lieutenants, he talks about the last, days of Malcolm X and talks about how strange the NYPD acted and stuff. But the point is that I found that book to be especially important because after I read that book, it broadened on a lot of levels my understanding of Malcolm because it came from so many different angles. Somebody else met Malcolm in Africa, and so he talked about his time with Malcolm in Africa and the things that Malcolm was saying and the things that he was doing and stuff. So you don't see that book very often, but that was a very important book. And it's kind of ironic, but I still I can't see it, but that the undercurrent, the one that says 21, does it say 21?
Which would
The undercurrent underneath John Henry Clark's name. 21.
21 black writers on the most charismatic and pivotal figure.
Yeah.
On Nat Turner.
Believe it or not, I still have that quote etched in my brain. You know, like I can recite that right now. But my point is that is an important book that I think is generally underrated. Now, there's some problems with it though. Like, for example, when they were they mentioned in the book, they have like the transcript of when the FBI visited Malcolm in February 1964. You know, they went to try to see whether or not Malcolm would snitch and give him information on the nation. Well, John Henry Clark and them, they misdated that. You know, they were off about two days. But simple things like that aside, you know, that certainly is an important book.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Different experience of coming to Malcolm. When I went to the library to get the autobiography when I was 15, some people had lifted it. Gone. So what I did is I went through the section and found other books on Malcolm. So the first book I read on Malcolm was The Last Year of Malcolm X.
That's a useful book
Then
now.
I went back and read the autobiography, and then I got Malcolm X, A Man in His Times. And did you deliberately set them at the polls? Because they represent two different perspectives on Malcolm. There is an article in Malcolm X, The Man in His Times, from the Reverend Albert Clegg, Jaramogi Ojeman, where he argues that Malcolm remained a plain black nationalist. That's his words. And then, of course, there's the George Brittman argument that Malcolm became a black nationalist plus, and the plus was meant to be socialism.
No
So
doubt.
I think it's important for people who are grappling with Malcolm's thoughts to put those two books in conversation with each other.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, you know, the books at the top, all the books at the top, there was a time when that was like 90, I know I'm making up a number, but there was a time when that was like 90% of the Malcolm X bibliography. You know what I mean? Like this is what, 73, you know, like if you were collecting Malcolm books in the 70s, man, you know, those were the ones you would have had. Anyway, let me not do reminiscing because we're more or less out of time. So I have one last Malcolm X clip, and that's going to close the whole thing out. So what I want to say is, I guess, last words from our panelists as we wind this thing on down. Because we about out of time, you know what I mean? We about out of time.
All right, so I can go first. I'm just gonna say thank you for the invitation to be on the panel. It's been great also to learn from I known Kwame for a while, so to meet and learn from two other powerhouses that I mean, I've learned a lot this past 3 hours, so I really appreciate it, and I'm honored to be able to share the space with you all and to have had this conversation. So I will defer to you all and let you all have the final fist in the air.
I too want to say thank you, Brother Takima, and I really appreciate being on the panel with Jakia and with Baba. It's very important to have younger people on because they bring a different generational insight. But what I appreciate was the format, having the clips with Malcolm so that we're reacting to the real person, and that creates accountability in what you can say, right? And how you interpret. And the last thing I would say is that to discuss a figure like Malcolm and many of the things that we're confronted with, we can't have these hour-long panels. We have to be able to stretch out. So I appreciate the fact that you provided a format that allowed us to stretch out and engage various facets. So thank you, Asante.
Thank you.
Yeah, and my last words. First, I want to reiterate what the Baba basically said as far as this opportunity and just appreciative of the format and the opportunity to exchange information, with serious brothers and sisters. So that's my first thing. And then the other thing that I'm reminded of, Malcolm, when I was doing some research years ago, I came across a poster. And in fact, I was in Harlem, visiting. I used to go to Harlem to do research and stuff when I was particularly working on the first edition of Malcolm's of the Malcolm X book. And I came across a poster of Malcolm. It was taken in August 1964 when he was in Accra, Ghana. And I purchased the poster and I put it up on my walls, and I kept it for maybe a decade or two. And ask me now where the poster is, I have no idea. Somewhere along the way, like so many other posters and stuff, it just left. Okay, so that's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
But what the poster said always represented a good summary of Malcolm. And so I would end on what the poster, it's real short, but what the poster basically said, and it had a picture of Malcolm. And it was unique because it was in color. So you could actually see Malcolm's, Malcolm's red hue, and his red hair. It all came out, something that you seldom do because a lot of times we see black and whites of Malcolm. So you really see the authentic Malcolm. But what the caption basically said was, it said, and I will quote, it said, he was a hero and a hope. He was not a myth, only a man. But to be a hope and a man in mid-20th century America was to be something special, unquote.
I like that.
And I just think that that's just, for me anyway, it always represented a good summary, minus all of the bling and all of the, accessories. Always thought that it was just a good, concise description of the importance of Malcolm X.
No, for real, for real. What I would say first of all, thank you all. Thank all three of you profoundly for making this thing happen. To Sundiata's point about, hey, you need some time to get into some of these conversations. I guess I'll say that now. I mean, even this, first of all, I mean, this 1 3-hour session, no, like I said, we got to do some more stuff on this because the conversation is too rich. I just wanted to say, I mean, the original idea was actually to go all day and have like 4 panels over about 7 hours, but just logistically and for a number of reasons, I had to scale it down. So, there was that. So, I mean, I certainly recognize that I mean, if we're gonna hold this guy in such high esteem, we have to take him seriously. And to take him seriously, I mean, that means you got to get way past like cliches and sound bites and such like that, and actually, dig in. What did the man actually have to say? And like you say, need some space for us to actually, what's the word? Like, break down, some of the many things he had to say. So I'm glad this was a start. I mean, even though we had the completely rough beginning, we eventually got something happening. So I'm happy about that. So once again, thank you all. Thank everybody who tuned in. And so we close with the man himself. So, when this clip ends, that'll be the end of the program. And so it's only appropriate that the last words we hear are from Malcolm X himself. Hopefully this plays, unlike the other video.
We are oppressed.
Can y'all hear it?
We are exploited.
Okay.
We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you? And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.
Yeah.
Oh, I said he would have the last word. I lied because I'm just going to say this. One other thing about the Malcolm X as a subject, you know, I just really just kind of thought about this. I mean, there is great pleasure and enjoyment in watching this man do his work, you know, listening to him and watching him. I mean, yeah, learning, et cetera, but it's there's a lot of enjoyment. There's a lot of enjoyment watching the man do his work. He was definitely put on earth, you know, to do exactly what he did, and he knew it. He loved it. But anyway, yeah, I love this guy. I love this guy. That's all I gotta say. I will. Hey, you know, we'll all be in touch. You know, phone, email, et cetera, et cetera. But thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank y'all. It was a pleasure.
It was truly a pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Peace. We'll get up a little later, people.
All right. Take care.
All right. You too, man.
All right now.